You may have always believed that the moon is just a cold, lifeless rock circling our planet, a silent witness to Earth's history. But what if that belief is completely wrong? What if I told you the moon is not a natural satellite at all, but a colossal spacecraft, one that was built, hollowed out, and placed into orbit on purpose? And inside that vessel, according to one former CIA agent, 250 million extraterrestrial beings are living right now. It sounds insane, right? Yet over the years, a growing number of scientists, intelligence insiders, and former space program employees have whispered the same thing, not in public statements, but in leaks, interviews, and classified briefings. So what truth has been buried deep inside the moon for all these years? And if this theory is even partially true, then who or what has been watching us all this time? So fasten your seat belt, because what you're about to hear is not a story. It's a pattern, a web of strange facts, censored documents, and first-hand testimonies that point to a terrifying possibility. The moon may not belong to us, and maybe it never did. It all began in July of 1970, at the height of the Cold War. While the world focused on nuclear weapons and the race to the stars, two Soviet researchers quietly published a paper that would shake the scientific community to its core. In an article for Sputnik magazine, Mikhail Vasin and Alexander Sherbukov, scientists from the Soviet Academy of Sciences, asked a question no one dared to consider. Is the moon truly a natural satellite, or could it be an artificial construct, designed by an intelligence far beyond that of humankind? According to their theory, the moon may have once been a solid celestial object, but was later hollowed out from within, using machinery more advanced than anything Earth had ever seen. The debris and molten rock expelled during the process, they argued, formed a thick outer shell, a kind of armor, forged from metals and minerals not found in nature. This shell would protect the structure from meteoric impacts and cosmic radiation, allowing it to function like a fortress in space. And once complete, the object was placed, with near-perfect precision, into stable orbit around Earth, as if guided by intelligence and intention. Western scientists laughed. Even within the Soviet Union, many physicists ridiculed the article as pure science fiction, an absurd fantasy dressed up in academic language. But time has a strange way of turning fiction into theory, because in the decades that followed, new evidence began to emerge, and some of it matched exactly what Vasin and Sherbukov described. In science, theories are only as strong as the evidence that supports them, and over the years, a string of discoveries has begun to paint a picture that is far stranger than anyone expected. Lunar missions like NASA's Clementine and Lunar Prospector, some conducted in cooperation with the U.S. Department of Defense, gathered highly detailed data about the moon's composition. And what they found defies natural explanation. Among the minerals and dust, scientists detected two highly radioactive elements, uranium and neptunium-237. To most of us, these names might not mean much, but to any nuclear physicist, they raise immediate red flags. These are not natural elements. They are man-made byproducts, materials that can only emerge through advanced nuclear technology. Uranium is formed during the enrichment of uranium, a process that takes place inside specialized industrial facilities or nuclear reactors. It doesn't exist in nature. Neptunium, meanwhile, is produced when plutonium is synthetically altered under controlled laboratory conditions. And yet, they're both on the moon. So how did these materials, which should not exist outside of advanced nuclear engineering, end up embedded in the lunar surface? Some suggested contamination, but further analysis ruled that out. Others proposed meteorite delivery, but no known meteorites contain these isotopes. There was only one remaining possibility. At some point in the moon's distant past, an intelligent presence introduced nuclear technology there. But the anomalies don't end with chemical traces. As scientists mapped the moon's internal structure using seismic and gravitational data, something even more disturbing came to light. Unlike Earth, the moon doesn't have a dense core. In fact, its mass is strangely concentrated near the surface, almost as if the moon were hollow. Seismic instruments placed during the Apollo missions recorded strange echoes, like vibrations bouncing around inside an empty shell. When struck by a lunar module, the moon rang like a bell, reverberating for hours, something that shouldn't happen if the moon were solid rock. This gave new weight to the once laughed-at Soviet theory. If the moon's center is hollow and its outer shell unusually dense, then it may not be a natural satellite at all. It may be a constructed object, built layer by layer for strength and durability, just like a spacecraft. And if that's true, then who built it, and why are we only now beginning to notice? In the mid-1990s, as the Cold War was drawing to a close, the United States quietly launched a mission to the moon called Clementine. Officially, its goal was simple: to search for ice at the lunar poles, a key resource for any future moon base. But behind that public explanation was a classified directive, one that very few knew about, according to Dr. John Brandenburg, a physicist and deputy manager of the Clementine mission. A hidden objective lay beneath the surface. A classified part of the mission, he later revealed in an interview, was to conduct imaging reconnaissance to determine whether someone was building a base on the moon. That's not science fiction. That's a direct statement from a man at the heart of America's defense-related space efforts. Brandenburg went even further. He described a photograph that he said he would never forget, an image showing a linear formation stretching for miles, perfectly aligned, with right angles and geometric precision. It didn't resemble any natural structure. It looked built, and according to him, the United States had no part in constructing it. This discovery shook him deeply. As a scientist trained in defense systems, Brandenburg stated with certainty, "Humans have never built anything like this on the moon, which leaves only one possibility: someone else is there." But that photo was never released to the public. In fact, very few raw Clementine images ever were. Several software engineers who accessed the Clementine image database noticed something strange. Large sections of pixelated blocks in certain frames, areas that had clearly been manually censored after the images were taken. Some images vanished entirely, others were uploaded briefly, then taken down, replaced by lower resolution versions, or re-encoded to blur out specific regions. Bright symmetrical shapes, angular shadows, structures that seemed to cast multiple directions of light, all scrubbed clean from the public archive. This was no accident. It was intentional redaction. Some of the most suspicious formations were located near the moon's dark side, a region that remains hidden from Earth, a perfect location for concealment. And it wasn't just the structures. Many Clementine photos showed bright, unnatural light sources in areas that should have been in total shadow, some with clear signs of elevation, symmetry, and geometry. To any trained analyst, these patterns were not random. They were signs of engineering, but instead of opening the files to the scientific community, the data was quietly locked away. The mission declared complete. No further explanation was given, and once again the question lingered. What was so dangerous that it had to be hidden? On July 20, 1969, the world watched with breathless awe as Neil Armstrong descended from the Apollo 11 lunar module and became the first human to set foot on the moon. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. It was a defining moment in human history, but something else happened that day, something that wasn't broadcast to the world. Exactly 34 seconds after that first step, the live communication feed between Apollo 11 and NASA Mission Control went dark. NASA called it a technical glitch, a brief loss of signal due to atmospheric interference. But over the decades, whispers from insiders told a very different story. According to a leaked audio transcript, quietly circulated among former NASA employees and UFO researchers, Armstrong's voice returned over a secure channel, trembling with shock. "Houston, we're seeing massive objects. Oh my God, you wouldn't believe it. They're lined up along the edge of the crater. They're watching us." This transmission was never heard by the public. Instead, a communications technician at NASA's Broadcasting Center later confirmed that the feed had been intentionally switched to a secure frequency, preventing the general audience from hearing what the astronauts were actually reporting. "We didn't cut the feed because of a glitch," the technician later admitted. "We cut it because what was being seen couldn't be allowed on television." What exactly did they see? Decades later, Buzz Aldrin, the second man on the moon, hinted in a private conversation that they had witnessed massive craft parked silently not far from their landing site in the Sea of Tranquility. And it wasn't just talk. Footage captured by a 360-degree camera mounted on the lunar module reportedly showed symmetrical objects moving along the crater rim, shapes that glided in perfect silence, casting unnatural shadows across the regolith. That footage was classified immediately. Several reels were removed from Apollo 11's archive, never to be seen again. Dozens of still photographs from the same mission were marked top secret, with no public explanation given. In April of 1997, during a private gathering of independent researchers, Armstrong himself is said to have spoken about the encounter, choosing his words carefully. While the full transcript remains sealed, those in attendance described his tone as solemn and his message clear. There were things up there, and they knew we were coming. The moon was not empty, it was occupied. And for at least 34 seconds, humanity made contact, not with a signal, but with a presence that was already watching. As the Apollo missions faded into history and public attention shifted to other frontiers, a quieter battle was unfolding behind the scenes, a battle over what would be remembered and what would be erased. According to Carl Wolf, a former U.S. Air Force intelligence officer who worked with satellite imagery at Langley Air Force Base, the truth about the moon never made it to the public. In a sworn statement, Wolf recalled seeing enormous geometric structures in photos taken from the far side of the moon, towers, domes, and what looked like massive buildings. When he asked a NASA colleague what he was looking at, the answer came cold and sharp. "You didn't see anything. Forget this ever happened." Wolf wasn't alone. Ken Johnston, a data and image archivist who worked directly with Apollo mission photographs, was ordered to destroy the original negatives of lunar images after the program ended. But instead of complying, he quietly saved a few. Years later, Johnston made them public, and what they showed stunned the world. Anomalous objects near landing sites, symmetrical shadows in places where no structure should exist. And most damning of all, photos that had been sanitized before release, with sections blurred, cropped, or replaced. In 2006, NASA itself launched an internal investigation. Its conclusion: over 700 magnetic data tapes from the Apollo missions were missing, including the original broadcast footage of the moon landing. The loss was described as unfortunate, but not suspicious. Yet for an agency as vast and methodical as NASA, the idea that hundreds of critical reels documenting one of humanity's greatest achievements simply vanished strains belief. And then came a revelation that changed everything. A former CIA pilot, John Lear, son of Learjet Corporation founder, and a man with deep connections to secret government programs, made a public statement that rippled through the entire UFO research community. There are currently about 250 million extraterrestrial beings residing within the moon. He didn't say might be. He said according to Lear, the moon is hollow, with vast underground cities, biological laboratories, and non-human civilizations living beneath its surface. He described multiple species, including reptilian entities and small humanoid figures, as inhabitants of these subterranean complexes. He claimed they had been involved in human abductions, genetic experiments, and unexplained aerial phenomena for decades. And most disturbingly, Lear said the reason we can't see any of this, not with our telescopes, not even with our satellites, is because these cities and structures are hidden by holographic projection and energy-based cloaking technology far beyond human understanding. This, he argued, is why the moon appears dead, because what's alive is hidden. Many dismissed his claims as fantasy, but then came more reports from former space defense officers, NASA engineers, and even remote sensing experts, describing details that aligned eerily with Lear's testimony. At some point, the pattern became too detailed to ignore, and the conclusion it pointed to was chilling. The moon is not a passive object. It is a base of operations, an ancient extraterrestrial hub, hidden in plain sight and orbiting Earth every single night. The deeper you look, the more consistent the accounts become. From secret military air bases to retired aerospace officers, more and more witnesses have come forward, each offering fragments of a larger, more unsettling picture. One such testimony came from a former U.S. Air Force officer stationed at Edwards Air Force Base, a facility long associated with experimental aircraft and classified technologies. In the early 1980s, he claimed to witness a disc-shaped craft descend silently onto the tarmac in the middle of the night. No sound, no dust, no warning. When the hatch opened, 3 beings emerged, small, slender, graceful, and moving as if gravity didn't apply to them. Their motion was smooth, almost liquid. He would go on to say that these entities matched exactly the descriptions given by other insiders who had spoken of the moon's hidden occupants. The more reports were compiled, the more patterns emerged. Many now believe that the moon is not just a place of residence. It is a command center, a watchtower, a control node in a vast, multi-dimensional system of surveillance and experimentation. It may be the origin point of many UFO sightings. It may be the hub from which abductions and contact events are coordinated. And it may also serve as a buffer, shielding Earth from forces we're not yet ready to face. And the most disturbing part, they've likely been there longer than we've been writing history. For millennia, ancient cultures across the planet spoke of the moon as a recent arrival, a visitor that was brought into the sky. Zulu legends in Africa speak of a time before the moon appeared, when the world was different, calmer, until the Watchers came. Even Plato hinted at a pre-lunar era, a time before Earth's tides, before the lunar pull shaped life. Could it be that what we call the moon was placed here, not to inspire poetry, not to control the seas, but to observe? So where does that leave us? If 250 million beings truly reside within that silent gray sphere, if entire alien cities are cloaked beneath its shell, then we have been living under observation for far longer than we've understood. Every night we gaze up and call it beautiful. We never ask who's looking back. You may not believe every detail you've just heard, and perhaps the idea of extraterrestrial civilizations inside the moon still feels too far-fetched. But if even a fraction of this is true, then everything we thought we knew about our place in the cosmos has been a lie.